Rachel has the night off. What if I were to tell you there is a surefire way to put people back to work right now? To put people back to work tomorrow? What if I were to tell you that this surefire job creator is something that has been embraced even by Republicans going back decades? What if I were to tell you that over the last 3 years, we have been doing the exact opposite of this tested, proven thing that helps end recessions? I got a graph for you tonight, but it's an unusual kind of graph. It's a mystery graph. You're going to see what I mean here. In 1981, shortly after Ronald Reagan was sworn in as president, he faced an awful recession, the worst since the Great Depression, in fact. And one of the things that Reagan did as president to help get people back to work after that recession is that he made this blue line right here go up. That blue line went up, and so did jobs. In 1990, halfway through George H.W. Bush's first term, again, the country's economy hit the skids. Part of the reason the 1990 recession didn't sink us totally, it's that red line right there. That red line, it went right up. 01, George W. Bush is president. The country is rocked by the bursting of the tech bubble and by 9/11. Again, the economy heads into recession. And again, the thing that helps end that recession is that yellow line right there, which goes up. So here's a mystery. What did all of those Republican presidents do to help end the recessions that they faced? What did they all increase as president during those recessions? What do those lines represent? Government jobs. Government employment grew under all those Republican presidents. Not only did we not lay off public workers, we hired more of them, a lot more. And that helped prevent bad recessions from turning into horrible ones. So what's happened to government employment in this recession? It's gone in the exact opposite direction. It has gone down. We've been suffering through recession that's been far worse than any recession in modern history. And one of the things we know the government can do to keep people in jobs is to give them jobs. That's the one thing we haven't been doing. You know, you've been told the whole problem right now, the big thing holding back this economic recovery, is that President Obama just keeps growing the size of government. So what Republicans keep saying, right? That's the problem. The government's giant tentacles just rip through this great country of ours and strangle private enterprise. You know that, right? You know it's kind of wrong, right? Government spending has gone up under Obama. Much has been temporary help to the newly unemployed workers and their families to afford food, housing, education, and health care. But government employment has gone down under Obama. And not because he's wanted it to. The entire political and media establishment in this country have had their collective hair on fire over the last 3 days over 6 words uttered by President Obama at the White House on Friday. But it's the 43 words that follow those 6 that are really, really important to the economy right now and that have gotten totally lost.
The private sector is doing fine. Where we're seeing weaknesses in our economy have to do with state and local government. Oftentimes, cuts initiated by governors or mayors who are not getting the kind of help that they have in the past from the federal government.
As Republicans keep pointing out, and as Obama agreed later in that day, the private sector is not doing fine. But it is adding jobs. You know what's doing terribly, though? You know what's really doing badly? The public sector. And the problem, as President Obama was trying to point out there before he got eaten up by the news cycle, is that the green line in this graph is going in the wrong direction. Instead of doing what we've done successfully as a country in the last 3 recessions before this one, instead of saving or even creating government jobs as a means of maintaining employment and demand in this country, instead of doing that, we've just let those jobs go away. We've put more of those people out of work, making the economy worse, leaving more unemployed people to fight for every open job, to sign up for unemployment insurance, to stop spending money in their local communities. Right now, the unemployment rate in this country is at 8.2%. Since Barack Obama was elected, the public sector has lost about 600,000 jobs. If you put those jobs back, if we hadn't lost one job, if we'd stayed neutral at 0, the unemployment rate would be down to 7.8% right now. Not great, but better. But what if we did more than that? At this point in George W. Bush's administration, public sector employment had grown by 3.7%. That'd be about 800,000 jobs today. If we had done that to help fight off this recession, if we had followed the Bush formula, then we'd have 1.4 million jobs more. And the unemployment rate would have fallen to 7.3%. Everything else had stayed the same. When the government employs somebody, it is a real job. A teacher is employed. A police worker is employed. A park ranger is employed. That person gets a check. They spend that money in their local grocery store or on their kids. They contribute to the economy. And yet these jobs were part of the past 3 Republican recoveries. Now that a Democrat is in the White House, well, here's Mitt Romney.
He wants another stimulus. He wants to hire more government workers. He says we need more firemen, more policemen, more teachers. Did he not get the message of Wisconsin? The American people did. It's time for us to cut back on government and help the American people.
Democrats have wanted to give state and local governments money to hire more teachers and policemen and park rangers. Mitt Romney is right about that. Republicans have blocked them. As you heard Mitt Romney say, Republicans don't believe in hiring more government workers. They don't believe in stimulus. They believe it's time to cut back on government, as he put it. This is a new belief on their part. It's not just this graph that shows Republicans usually increase government jobs when they're the ones in power during recession. It's also Republican President Richard Nixon who famously declared that we are all Keynesians now. It's Ronald Reagan implementing stimulative deficit finance tax cuts and increasing government spending in the 1980s. It's George W. Bush passing what was called, literally titled, the Economic Stimulus Act of 2008. It's Republicans right at the beginning of the Obama administration proposing a variety of stimulus measures which had the same basic idea: deficit spending, usually on tax cuts, to goose the economy. But now that President Obama is pleading with Republicans to act in a way that they have acted for decades during the worst recession or continued downturn since the Great Depression, they say they don't believe in that stuff anymore. They say it's time to cut government spending. They say the only thing that will get the economy moving again is getting government out of the way. But the thing that's really remarkable here, they don't believe that. One thing you might worry about with a Romney administration is that they would come in and slash the budget immediately, slash public employment, slash government spending. It's what they seem to be saying, right? But they're not going to do any of those things, not one. And I don't know that because I have some secret insight into Mitt Romney. I don't know that because I looked deep into his heart and came away realizing that he truly, truly believes government spending is necessary during an economic slowdown. I know that because I just listened to what he said when he was asked. When Mark Halpern of Time magazine asked Mitt Romney recently why he wouldn't just dramatically cut government spending his first year of office in 2013, why he wouldn't slash government spending by, say, $1 trillion if government spending is truly the thing that's holding the economy back, here's how Mitt Romney responded. Quote, well, because if you take $1 trillion, for instance, out of the first year of the federal budget, that would shrink GDP over 5%. That is, by definition, throwing us into recession or depression. So I'm not going to do that, of course. Of course. You could not have gotten a better definition of Keynesian budgeting from President Obama. You probably could have gotten one from Keynes. Take money out of the federal budget, and in the short term, in the immediate term, you take money out of the economy. You reduce demand. You slow growth. The government should spend and hire during recessions. That's one of the things that helps end them. Republicans know that. Well, at least they know that when they're the ones in power. Joining us now is the host of MSNBC's Weekend Show, Up with Chris Hayes. He's also the author of the new book out tomorrow, I believe, Twilight of the Elites, America After Meritocracy. Chris, it is good to see you.
It's always great to see you, Ezra.
So what do you attribute this sort of turnaround, this 180 on Keynesian economics, and more to the point on government employment? Because it is the case that Republicans in previous years have just been gangbusters on government employment after recessions. It's gone up by much, much more than anything they've led on in the last couple of years.
You know, we had Patrick Gaspard, who's head of the DNC right now, on my show this weekend, and I asked him straight up, right, the question that I think is on everyone's mind and is implied by your very deftly done opening monologue, which is, are the Republicans intentionally tanking the economy? And he didn't answer the question straight up, but I think the evidence does mount. And I don't even say that as to impugn the good faith of the Republican Party, because I can imagine a scenario in which you think that the president is such a disaster for the economy, right? You think he's so bad long term that a short-term that contributing to the short-term demise of the economy is actually for the greater good of rescuing America from a second term of Barack Obama. But I think it becomes harder and harder and harder to make the case that that is not what is going on. I mean, it clearly is the case that Republicans, when in office, have done all the things that you've mentioned. They've increased public sector employment. They've been fine with stimulus. George W. Bush signed a stimulus act. And I think that it is the case that there is no political incentive right now for the Republican Party to boost or to do anything to alleviate the suffering and misery in the economy now between now and Election Day. And the one big question in all this, right, is the way the system is designed is a poor economy in the short term should hurt incumbents in Congress. And I think they are somehow immune from the effects of that. And I think that's the big open question about whether that's going to continue to hold. But so far, it looks like it will.
I think they're right. I mean, my understanding of the evidence on that is it tends to hurt the majority party, and Americans see the majority party as a president. But I'm interested in what you say here, because I always take it as this kind of psychologically complex phenomenon that you see, by the way, on the left, too, sometimes, where people convince themselves very quickly of what it is in their electoral interest to believe. It's to sort of use a Sinclair line. It's hard to get a man to believe what his reelection depends on him not believing. And so that creates sort of this difficult question with compromise, right? Because if they really convince themselves of it too much, whatever Mitt Romney says, there's a chance he could come into office and the Tea Party folks in Congress say, you may know deep down that you can't take $1 trillion out of the budget, but you promised cap, cut, and balance, and we are holding it to you, and you are going to tank the economy right now.
This is to me, this is the core existential debate here, which is how much is Mitt Romney lying, right? How much does he actually believe what he's saying? That's the big question in American politics right now. And I think you could make a case on either side. But I think you're absolutely right. I mean, at a certain point, everybody in the vast right-wing media machine is saying the same thing, right? Which is that government spending during recession can only hurt. It creates uncertainty. It hurts small businesses. It's prolonging the recession, et cetera, et cetera. And I think it's going to be very hard to do that 180 pivot if he actually is, in fact, elected. Now, I think it's an unanswered question which direction he would go. And you and I actually debated this on my show, right? What is in the heart of Mitt Romney? But I think that right now the coalition has been mobilized so strongly in favor of that it's going to be very, very, very difficult to walk that back.
I think it's right that it's difficult to walk it back, but I guess you end up sort of saying, well, there'll be a lot of tax cuts, it'll be a lot of this. Right. But the thing that worries me about this, in the sort of broad way that you were putting it in terms of who gets rewarded and who gets punished, is that I feel like what we're learning increasingly is that we have this kind of breakdown of accountability in the American political system where you can have a minority that using obstruction and later on divided government that essentially drives outcomes, or at least drives non-outcomes through gridlock. And then instead of getting judged for the consequences, the majority gets judged for consequences that aren't of their making. I mean, Republicans and Democrats agree that President Obama's preferred economic policy, the American Jobs Act, has not actually passed Congress. And yet this is considered the Obama economy. And Republicans say, every job lost, or every job not gained is 100% on his watch, despite the fact that what he would like is something very, very different than what we have. What we have is a little bit more similar to the kind of
Boehner
slowly
economy.
reducing austerity spending that they would prefer.
Yeah, and this is something that I think you put your finger on what is the problem, right? Which is that they have normalized obstruction so much that it is no longer a story. And I myself, I will say, I'm guilty of this. I was just having a conversation today about how much we cover Congress or don't cover Congress. And what ends up happening is you don't cover bills that are in Congress or initiatives in Congress. You think, well, that'll never get passed. You don't cover presidential initiatives because it won't pass Congress, right? The American Jobs Act. You take the dysfunction as the status quo, as normal, right? And so it is not a news story when Republicans in Congress do things to make sure that the economy in the short run doesn't recover, even though if you step back for a second and you don't think of that as normal, it's a fairly remarkable fact about the depths of dysfunction and radicalization on the right side of the aisle right now. And I think that's really true. They have succeeded in making this assumed by everyone. It has been priced into how we in the media talk about them, and they're getting away with it because of that.
Gridlock is now on the baseline. Chris Hayes, host of MSNBC's Weekend Morning Show, Up with Chris Hayes, author of the new book that comes out tomorrow, Twilight of the Elites, America After Meritocracy. I have read this book. It is wonderful. You guys should all buy it. Chris, you should be very proud of it.
I really appreciate that. It means a lot. Thanks.
Chris, thank you for joining. It is on. between the United States government and the government of the state of Florida. Anything you can sue, I can sue better. And these stakes are really, really high for the rest of the country and, in fact, for small d democracy itself. That story's next.